So going on right up with the new hype servant Morgan, we have two fairy knight versions of our good old buddies from the Knights of the Round Table. The first one that I'm going to cover is the fairy knight version of Gawain. And before we even get into this video, can I get a rip and F in chat for my homie Tristan? If you know, you know. If you don't, I won't spoil it for you. But if you enjoy FGO content, I upload these videos every single day, and all I ask for in return is a like on the video and a subscribe to the channel, as it does help me out. You can click that join button to further support the channel if you would like to become a channel member. But with that being said, let's dive right into Fairy Knight Gawain. Now, when I first started looking at this Fairy Knight Gawain, I was like, man, this is just going to be like Gawain 2.0, and Gawain's not all that bad, but he's not a great servant by any stretch of the imagination. He's pretty average, all things considered, but they really did surprise me with this one. If you think she's just going to be like Gawain but with titties, then you're actually going to be sorely mistaken. They actually built her very, very well. Now, looking at her deck, she actually has a very powerful quick card that has 5 hits and 10% star generation. And considering she is a buster servant, if you're pairing her with someone like Merlin and his second skill happens to be active and you can click this quick card, you actually will gen a decent amount of stars for her to play around with. So that is something that you do not want to forget about. Or let's just say you have somebody else that's buffing her star gen. This quick card can be very, very good in, like, say, a quick chain, or just when being buffed you can drop a decent amount of stars. They gave her the triple monkey deck because obviously she is still Gawain, so she's still going to be gorilla but female, and that's going to be very, very good for her overall damage because, again, she can bust her brave chain, and even if her NP is not active, she can do a very powerful turn where she can do a triple buster attack and just like mow down whoever's in front of her. But they didn't forget about her arts card. They gave her 74% NP charge with a 3-hit arts card, meaning if you can snag a crit on this arts card, you should be pretty fine when it comes to NP. Although this Gawain has things in place to make sure she can also get her NP off with some consistency, right? Which is very good for these buster servants. That's kind of been the one complaint I've had with the buster style of gameplay, is that they tend to be these one pump chumps who fire off their NP and then they can't do it for like 4 or 5 turns, and then you're just meandering around watching the two Merlins play Garden of Avalon with each other, and it's really just not all that fun. But now we're starting to get buster servants that have sustain, and even when their NP is down, they have ways to kind of get it back up, or they have things they can do while their NP is down to prepare themselves for the next NP. Also, I'd like to know that they gave her the 5 hits on the extra attack, so that just automatically means she's a goated servant. But looking at her first skill, this is the Numeral of the Saints skill that you all know and love, right? You're getting 18% attack for 3 turns, and if it happens to be nice and sunny outside, you're getting an additional 28% buster performance for 3 turns as well on a 5-turn cooldown. Now, spoiler alert, no, she does not have a way to induce Sunlight Battlefield for herself, which is really unfortunate, because when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's how they're going to make her different. She's either going to be able to change the battlefield to sunlight, or she's going to be able to give herself that buff, but no, she's not like the other Gawain quite yet. And if you look at her NP, it's probably going to make a bit of sense why she doesn't inflict sunlight. Like, she makes it all dark and scary, and she turns into a giant demon lady, so that probably makes sense that she's not making it sunny and everything. But this is a very, very good opening skill, and if you can actually get this to proc, her NP damage is actually very good. Without it, she's a bit more like mid-pack when it comes to AoE sabers, but if you can get this sunlight thing to proc, she's actually very high in terms of her AoE damage for a saber. So you do have that in the back pocket, that if you're like, okay, I know it's going to be sunny, I can bring her to this fight. Now, the second and third skill, this is where she starts to distinguish herself between her and the actual Gawain, because her second skill is a 30% buster buff for 3 turns, so that's, you know, automatically good, just free 30%. And then she's granting herself the survival of the fittest buff for 3 turns. And what this means is whenever she attacks with one of her normal attacks, not her NP, she gets 1000 HP, she removes the latest buff from an enemy, and if the buff is successfully removed, she lowers their defense by 10% for 3 turns. So you're getting a lot of damage when it comes to Fae Gawain, because not only is she giving herself massive buster damage, but let's say you throw like 3 attacks in front of your NP, or not 3, but, you know, 2 attacks in front of your NP, and you're able to remove 2 buffs, you're also getting 20% defense down on your opponent, which is really going to help out your damage. The only bad part about this is you're not getting extra damage if your enemy doesn't have any buffs. So say you're bringing her for like a farming node where your enemies shouldn't be popping their buffs because, you know, you're trying to 3-turn farm anyway. You are going to suffer a little bit of damage there, but if you're bringing her to challenge quests or more difficult content like boss fights and some of the lost belts, she's going to do very well because the more your enemies make themselves stronger, the more damage she does, and she just removes their buffs anyway. So basically, treat any buff your enemy gives themselves as more damage for you. Now, do keep in mind, you do have to actually successfully remove it, so if they have, like, buff removal resistance or something, you might be in a little bit of trouble, but I do like how this skill is built. I also do think the extra 1k HP every time you attack is very useful, because it's going to help her keep some sustain, especially when we look at her third skill, where she's giving the entire party 1000 damage cut for 3 turns, meaning she's going to be a bit tankier, so she's not really just going to be like, oh, here's 1000 HP, and then I lose 3k that turn, so it didn't really matter. It's gonna help that HP stick to her because she's gonna be cutting down on a lot of the damage that's coming to her. But then something that's super powerful is she gains this new regeneration buff. So everyone in the party is refunding 15% of their NP gauge every turn for 3 turns. And this is what I mean where she has some staying power. So the original Gawain just has like a 20% battery, right? So you can kind of fire off his NP and he's good, whatever. But this Gawain is going to end up having 45% over 3 turns, and that gives her some sustain. So you might be able to pop this turn 1. Say you have like a K-scope, your Merlin gives her 20% NP, she can fire her NP off. And then every turn she's going to start refunding more and more of her NP. And it should lead to her being able to sustain her Buster style of gameplay, and I really do like that. So looking at her skills, you start off with like, oh, it's just a Gawain clone, but then the second skill is kind of what she's built around doing, and it's a very solid skill. It's a very good niche to be into, with the only real weakness being you lose a lot of damage if your enemy's not buffing themselves. But then you also see in the third skill that she has some sustain because she's going to not only keep herself alive, but the party alive as well, and help everyone charge their NPs, which do keep in mind that if you have Merlin with this Fae Gawain, Merlin has a built-in 5% NP refund per turn. So with this skill active, she's going to be giving Merlin 20% NP per turn, meaning more HP for Fae Gawain, more stars, more NP, and it's just going to get real ridiculous real quick. So I do like the synergy that she has with the main Buster support. But then we have her NP, which is an AoE Buster NP that has 5 hits on it. So, you know, you buff it with some star gen and you might drop a few stars, but I wouldn't count on it. She's going to increase her own max HP by 3000 for 5 turns. So again, you know how we were talking about she might be able to stack an NP or 2, maybe 3 if you're super lucky. Every NP she fires, she's going to be getting 3k max HP. So let's say you're able to get 2 in this 5-turn cooldown. That means she's getting an additional 6k HP. And her HP stat is already really high. Like, it's 13,500 as a 4-star. Like, she's got a big, thick ol' HP stat. And then she's stacking like an extra 6k on that. You can consistently see her be at like 19k HP, which is redonkulous levels of HP. Especially combined with the fact that she has damage reduction. And again, you could be pairing her with someone like Merlin, who also gives her more like max HP with hero creation. So it's just going to get real out of hand real fast. She also reduces her skill cooldowns by 1 every time she fires her NP. Meaning you really don't have to wait all that often to do your burst damage, because every time you fire NP, you're cutting off 1 turn that you have to wait to get your skills back. So I do like that effect. And then finally, the Overcharges increasing her Buster performance by 20 to 40%. It does activate first, and what I do like about this is that even at Overcharge 1, as long as your second skill is up, you are getting a mana burst for that turn. So if you put this at the lead of your Buster Brave chain, the next 2 Buster cards are basically going to get like a 50% performance buff, and it's going to be real nice. So overall, she is still a gorilla. She is still basically like the original Gawain, but I like her design a bit better. Now, Gawain has some things over her, right? The fact that he's able to give himself his own numeral of the Saint buff, because he can give himself the Sunlight buff, so he can guarantee that mana burst and everything. That also gives him specific synergy with Ozymandias, who's a very, very good support slash DPS rider. But this Gawain, I think, has maintained the spirit of what Gawain does, but is now doing her own thing, if that makes sense. She's broken off enough to be considered her own servant, and I really do like how she's built. And especially because she's on Morgan's banner, it just adds more value to that banner, right? Because what people don't think about is like, oh, I want to summon for this 5-star servant, but you got to think about the quality of the banner as well. Because you're not always going to get the 5-star servant. So you got to think, well, what 4 stars, what CEs, what 3 stars are on rate up? So if I don't get the 5-star, I can at least walk away with a consolation prize. And so if you don't get Morgan, either as a current JP player or you're an NA player looking at this banner 2 years down the line, you can at least see that Morgan's very good, but if I don't get her, then Fae Gawain is also very, very solid. And, well, Fae Tristan we'll talk about tomorrow, but he's also very, well, she's very good, I guess. And it just adds value to the entire banner. But I'd love to hear what you guys think about Fae Gawain in the comments down below. We are in the middle of Lost Belt 6 hype. I'm going to try to shift back over to the NA version because I still need to talk about Asclepius. But come on, we've been waiting like a year and a half for Lost Belt 6 to come out. So, you know, let me enjoy the hype for a little bit and then we'll go back to the NA version. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. You guys have yourselves a nice day. Peace. Late, guys.